Okay, we're going to begin our afternoon session on guidelines, but before we begin, this is very off the cuff, but it was brought to my attention that there are a number of women here who are hearing what we're discussing for the first time, and some of it is traumatic and some of it is triggering to them because these are feelings that have been repressed, and for the first time, they're acknowledging that they're not the only ones. They're not alone. Some have feared getting up and asking questions because they're afraid that they are going to break out in tears. I want those women to know that you are loved. God loves you, and He will embrace you with His love and His mercy as you deal with those issues, those traumas, and those triggers, and that the church's theology and people are here for you to the best of their ability, and we are here for you, and may God bless you in your challenges, okay? I would like to bring my husband up, and he is going to lead us into this session.
So good afternoon, everyone. Is it the message is coming out? Very good. So first off, before I dig into the script, I just want to thank the Prodromou Center. What a wonderful luncheon they put on for us, and give a lot of round of applause to all those people who worked and served to help put this together. Whoa, come back. Thank you for that. So I'm on my wife's computer, so she's a little nervous because I'm touching her computer. So this session is titled How to Restore the Ordained Order of Deaconess Today and the Proposed Guidelines. I'm Gust Mecera. I've been a founding member of St. Phoebe from the beginning. My wife is the founder. It's been an amazing journey with her and the entire board and in our work and endeavors. And I'll be moderating this session along with my wife. And while the church already has specific criteria for the female diaconate, these guidelines must be re-examined and considered for today's needs. In today's session, we will hear from speakers Reverend Dr. Perry Hamalis and Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost, who will discuss a process by which the Orthodox Church might restore the ordained order of deaconess today. To that end, they will share proposed guidelines, a document that has been methodically and carefully constructed by board members, advisory board members, and other respected scholars and theologians. After the presentations, we will hear from our panelists, His Eminence Metropolitan Nathanael, Dr. James Skedros, and Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou, who will offer remarks. Then, if there is time, we will open up the session to questions and answers. I would now like to introduce each of our speakers and our panelists. Their full bios can be found in your program. Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost teaches at Western Washington University and Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and is chair of the board of St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess. Father Perry Hamalis is a deacon, a professor of religion at North Central College, and serves on the St. Phoebe Board Center's advisory board. His Eminence Metropolitan Nathanael is the Greek Orthodox Metropolitan of Chicago. Dr. James Skedros is the Michael G. and Anastasia Kantonis Professor of Byzantine Studies and Professor of Early Christianity at Hellenic College of Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, and currently serves as the intern dean. Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou is a faculty member in the International Studies program at Boston College and serves on the St. Phoebe Center Advisory Board. I ask you to help me welcome Deacon Perry Hamalis and Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost. And I think it's Carrie.
Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon. How does this sound? Good. Okay, great. So, brothers and sisters in Christ, thank you for being here with us for this particular presentation. To me, it's the most exciting thing that we're doing today, although everything is exciting and wonderful. But we specifically did this after lunch, had the most exciting thing, so we can all stay awake for it. Yay! Okay. So we are here today to present and discuss a historic document created by the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess. The title, and you have it in your hand, is Proposed Guidelines for the Revival of the Ordained Female Diaconate and the Orthodox Church Today. The St. Phoebe Center created this document to address the existing need for a clear vision of what the ordained order of deaconesses might look like today, along with a possible process for how we as a community might go about its revival. This afternoon, I will discuss the process of this document's creation, and then Deacon Perry Hamalis will preview some of its contents, knowing that, yes, you have it in your hands, but you have not had time to thoroughly read it yet. And then we will then hear responses and reactions to the proposed guidelines document from our three eminent panelists. Finally, I really am looking forward to having an opportunity to hear from all of you, your reactions, your responses, not just today, but in the future. Email me, call me, talk to me later. I would really like your feedback on this document. It's meant to be a living document. So I'm going to reiterate and elaborate on some of the points I made last night. I think they're worthy of reiteration, and not everyone was here last night. 35 years ago, in 1988, Ecumenical Patriarch Demetrios I convened a consultation with representatives from 12 autocephalous churches in Rhodes, Greece, to consider the place of women in the Orthodox Church. And we've heard reference to this consultation several times already today. The participants urged the church to renew the Order of Deaconess. A document produced by the Gathering, which we now refer to as the Rhodes Consultation, says this, and this has been read, but I think it's worth reading it again. The Apostolic Order of Deaconess should be revived. Such a revival would represent a positive response to many of the needs and demands of the contemporary world and many spheres. The revival of women deacons in the Orthodox Church would emphasize in a special way the dignity of women and give recognition to her contribution to the work of the church as a whole. The historic Rhodes Consultation marks the first, but not the only, as we heard this morning, expression in the modern era of an international consensus among Orthodox thinkers and leaders to revive this ministry. The Rhodes Consultation and other such church calls for the deaconess were based in the historical precedent for this order, but also the current need. The ministry of women as deaconesses is lacking and needed in the Orthodox Church today. I think that's a theme we've been hearing over and over so far. Such needed ministry includes, but is not limited to, pastoral counseling, chaplaincy, spiritual companioning, teaching religious subjects, catechesis, missionary outreach, interfaith witness, philanthropy, nursing and social work, parish administration, family ministry, and youth and young adult ministry. The aim of all efforts of deaconesses would be to minister particularly to women, but also to contribute positively to the salvation and spiritual care of the church's members and larger society. I mentioned last night that some members of the Rhodes Commission who were there in 1988 left that consultation thinking they would have deaconesses within a year or two. We're still waiting. We're still waiting. There are many reasons for this wait, even though the frequency and urgency of the calls for deaconesses have increased since then. This gap between calling and action hasn't been bridged yet. And as I said last night, I think one of the reasons for this is we don't have an action plan. We don't have a roadmap. We don't have a how will we do this. We keep saying, yes, it's a legitimate part of our past. Yes, we need it. Yes, we should do it. But how are we going to do it? So that is the need for this kind of consideration of pragmatic, concrete process was one of the reasons that the St. Phoebe Center created this document. On the 30th anniversary of the Rhodes event 5 years ago, the St. Phoebe Center held an event in Chicago, which addressed the historical precedent, current need, and these many internal calls to renew the order of deaconess. An attendee there came up to me and said, "You've convinced me. I support deaconesses now, but I can't imagine what it would look like to have deaconesses in the church today. I can't envision it." This remark really stuck with me and stuck with the other St. Phoebe board members. The need for the expansion of the imagination was another reason that the St. Phoebe Center crafted the proposed guidelines. The proposed guidelines build upon two other visions for deaconesses today that have been offered. One is the St. Catherine Vision Center, and also the precedent of the Orthodox Church in Africa. So the St. Phoebe Center has benefited greatly from the document entitled Introductory Parameters for the Ministry of Ordained Deaconesses in the Orthodox Church, published in March 2019 by St. Catherine's Vision, whose work we commend. In many ways, the St. Phoebe Center's proposed guidelines are in accord with the St. Catherine Vision document, but in other ways, we offer a different vision. For example, St. Phoebe's proposed guidelines advocate the renewal of this order in a parish setting rather than a monastic setting first. We feel that in the parish setting, woman-to-woman ministry is severely lacking and deeply needed. Also in a monastic setting, but the need is dire in a parish setting. It was the hope also of the St. Phoebe Center to create a really streamlined, very accessible set of proposed guidelines so that all the members of the church, non-academics, all of us, can contemplate this process of renewing the order of deaconess together. The St. Phoebe Center offers our own proposal in the shared spirit of assisting the church in its ongoing process of discernment regarding the female diaconate. Now, the second vision for deaconesses in the church today comes from Africa, and I talked a little bit about this last night. In November 2016, the Holy Synod of the Alexandrian Patriarchate, the Orthodox Church in Africa, voted to reinstitute the order of deaconess to minister to local need in the African church. The Synod there was moved to do so after attending the 2016 Holy and Great Council. The council documents included several statements supporting the agency of local churches, including this one, quote, "Each local church, as she offers the Holy Eucharist, is the local presence and manifestation of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church." That's from the message of the Great and Holy Council. It is known that the original intention of Patriarch Theodoros was to ordain these women to the diaconate, as we've mentioned, which would have been faithful, actually, to our tradition to ordain. But donors outside of Africa threatened to cut off income streams to the African church if the patriarch went ahead with ordinations. This threat was meaningful because the African church is not self-sufficient. It's dependent on outside funding. The patriarch therefore consecrated these women as deaconesses as a concession to this pressure, rather than ordaining them. The patriarch Theodoros did continue to consecrate more deaconesses in Africa in the following years, including at least 2 in Sierra Leone. It is meaningful to the rest of the Orthodox Church that deaconesses were created at all here in the 21st century and created to address unique and local needs, thus affirming the agency of the autocephalous church to do this. The effort to renew the order of deaconesses in Africa continues. The word from Africa that I'm hearing is that ordinations will take place in the near future. In the meantime, the St. Phoebe Center salutes the Alexandrian Patriarchate for making history and preparing the way for the rest of the Orthodox world. As for the process of how we created the proposed guidelines, the idea of creating such guidelines came to the St. Phoebe Center board in 2020. After much discussion and even more prayer that the Holy Spirit would guide us, 2 members of the St. Phoebe Center Advisory Board originally drafted a document, Father Deacon Perry Hamalis and Dr. D. Jacquet, who isn't able to be with us today. The document was then reviewed and modified by the St. Phoebe Center governing board. Then that draft was shared with a diverse group of trusted allies and friends of the St. Phoebe Center from many American expressions of the Orthodox Church, men and women, deacons, priests, and bishops, scholars, including historians, theologians, liturgists, and non-scholars, and as well as the entire St. Phoebe Center Advisory Board. Feedback from all these constituencies was then reviewed and integrated into the document that you have before you today. As we worked on this document, the St. Phoebe Center simultaneously considered how best to publish it, how best to release it. At what time and what place should we make it public? When planning the events for celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and also considering that this year is the 35th anniversary of the Rhodes Consultation, it was clear to us that today, here at this symposium at Hellenic College Holy Cross, is the ideal time and place. And it is our prayer that today will mark the beginning of practical planning towards renewing Deaconesses. I invite you to consider the document after we depart from the symposium, and as I said, continue to send your feedback by getting in touch with the center. We also invite you to forward it to family, friends, and colleagues. The proposed guidelines will be published on our website later today, and soon we will be distributing these to hierarchs around the world, urging them to create a process for reinstituting deaconesses. And I wish to emphasize the word process here. Many people have observed that theoretically, a bishop could ordain a woman as deaconess tomorrow. This would be one way to go about the reinstitution of the order of deaconess. A bold bishop understanding that he is responsible for those he ordains being moved by the Spirit. While the St. Phoebe Center wouldn't stand in the way of such an action, we actually think it might be less than ideal. Ideally, the reinstitution of this order will come about as part of a communal process, with faithful and clergy working together. Ideally, a synod or council of bishops working with laity would commit to a series of steps, and this is the kind of process that we propose here in the proposed guidelines. Now, I said this last night, I'm going to say it again. Some people who support deaconesses will say the Orthodox Church isn't ready. And this makes me think of the question we had earlier today. We know the history, we know the need, why haven't we done this? What needs to happen next to see this actually take place? But we hear from some people that given the limited public presence of women in the Orthodox Church in leadership and in liturgy, we need to sort of slowly move towards deaconesses with baby steps like first tonsuring more women and as readers and chanters. The St. Phoebe Center absolutely supports the tonsuring of women serving in these liturgical roles. In fact, I think if we tomorrow tonsured all the women that are actually serving in these liturgical roles, it would astound the church to see how many, right? But there's no logical progression between these roles and that of deaconess. And in fact, we have a robust ecclesiology and precedent for deaconesses, and ironically, little for these so-called minor orders. So to say that we should wait for these kinds of reasons or move slowly is a failure of imagination. This is part of our history, and it should be part of our immediate future. To say that we should wait for the right time is to needlessly delay action. There is no perfect time to do anything, and the right time, the time when this ministry is needed, is now. Furthermore, I truly believe, and the St. Phoebe Center believes, that there are parishes here in the United States that are ready, in which the clergy and the faithful understand the history of this order, see a present-day need, and wish to have church-sanctioned and supported women ministering as deaconesses. There are women today of good faith who have both the theological training and the diaconal service skills to be ordained. There are even more women with theological education who with theological education would be ready to be ordained. We don't need to continue to call. We don't need to continue to hash through the history. We can act. And in fact, I think there is an ethical imperative for the Orthodox Church to act. We don't need to set up a series of prerequisites. This is a legitimate part of our tradition, and we can claim it now. Let's not have another 35 years of talking and calling. Education will always be part of the St. Phoebe Center and the mission and the work that we do. Many of the people in the church don't know the history and so forth, but we don't need to wait. So the St. Phoebe Center has written and released this document to prompt the church to begin a deliberate process towards ordaining deaconesses. The document is ours, but the process is not. The process of ordaining deaconesses, again, belongs to the whole church. This document does not claim to be comprehensive, nor does it intend to be the final word. The Orthodox Church itself, faithful and clergy working together, will create a process that may or may not be what we have outlined here. Instead, the proposed guidelines document aims to spark our God-given creativity as a community and facilitate conversation and action regarding the urgently needed ministry of deaconess. May it be blessed. Thank you.
I'm very grateful for the ongoing work of the St. Phoebe Center, for the hospitality that's being extended to all of us this weekend by Hellenic College Holy Cross, my alma mater, to our panel respondents, and to all of you who are participating prayerfully and attentively in this symposium. Notwithstanding the inherent limitations in knowing the past, and some differences in interpreting the details within the holy tradition, decades of research on the historical teachings and practices related to the deaconess within our church have led to broad agreement that at the very minimum, the historical Orthodox tradition included a discrete order of deaconess for many centuries. And after the order of deaconess fell into disuse around the 11th or 12th century, the church never issued a formal condemnation of it on theological or spiritual grounds, nor was there ever an official decision of the church to suspend the use of the order of deaconess. Therefore, there is no doctrinal or theological reason to prohibit the restoration of female deacons. It was a legitimate part of our Orthodox tradition for centuries. In addition, over the past century, our church's conversations and research on this topic and about the role of women in ministry and worship more broadly have led many of us to further conclusions that the revival of the order of deaconess is needed today so that the church can more fully bear witness to our God and Savior and more fully love and serve our neighbor. And a revived order of the deaconess will not be identical to what it was 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,200 years ago, but it must be consistent with the distinctive role that the deacon has played within our historical tradition and attuned to the distinctive needs of the church and the world today. So, if we accept these claims as true, we've heard this over and over already in the past 24 hours, a series of questions arise that include the following. How might the church move from research, dialogue, and calls for revived order of deaconess to the actualization or realization of female deacons? Who would be a candidate for this revived diaconia? Where would deaconesses serve? What roles or responsibilities could or should be entrusted to deaconesses? When and through which process might deaconesses become a part of the broader life and ministry of the church? So the St. Phoebe Center document entitled Proposed Guidelines for the Revival of the Ordained Female Diaconate in the Orthodox Church Today, which you have all received a copy of, seeks to move us forward as a church by proposing answers to some of these challenging questions. Since this document has just now been shared with the public, I have been asked to provide an overview of its content and some of its core teachings. Before I do so, however, let me just make one further comment. In his first theological oration, St. Gregory the theologian writes, "Goodness is not goodness if the means of achieving it are wrong." The St. Phoebe Center strives in all that it does to work in a way that is consistent with the ethos and the phronima of our faith. And this is also true in how the center views the path forward. As I understand it, the center has produced these guidelines to help the whole church, hierarchs, priests, deacons, monastics, and all the faithful, as the church makes decisions. It is not the role or responsibility of the St. Phoebe Center to ordain female deacons. This is the role and responsibility of our bishops. However, it is our role as the whole church to bear witness to God as fully as possible. Bless you. To speak prophetically when necessary, and to express our needs and offer our talents, expertise, and counsel to our bishops as they fulfill the distinctive responsibility entrusted to them. So, let's do a bit of an overview. The document is approximately 2,000 words, and it's divided into 9 sections, and those sections are listed here on the screen: introduction and purpose, eligibility, formation and training, screening and recommendation, possible ministries of deaconesses, possible liturgical duties, accountability and evaluation, presence in the parish, and proposed pilot program, with a conclusion as well. So let's consider some of the key points and passages from the document. In section 1, introduction and purpose, the document provides a brief overview of efforts to study and discuss the issue, of overview of calls for the revival of female deacons, and of the mission and contributions of the St. Phoebe Center over the past decade. It expresses gratitude for earlier efforts, like those of St. Catherine's Vision. And this section includes the following important statement. The purpose of this text is to advance the topic, to outline several concrete steps, and to invite further constructive reflection in key areas. This document does not claim to be comprehensive, nor does it intend to be the final word. Instead, what follows aims to spark our God-given creativity as a community and to facilitate conversation and action. So it's clear that these proposed guidelines are proposed guidelines. They are intended to offer a thoughtful starting point and to provoke critical reflection on the challenging questions that are before us. They do not claim to be the final word, nor do they assume that they are the best answers. However, these guidelines have been written based on a sincere effort to understand both our historical Orthodox tradition and our current reality. They have been written with the expectation that they will be revised based on feedback from all of you, our clergy, monastics, scholars, and faithful members of the church. So the document provides a first draft, a place to begin, and it invites constructive suggestions. And we really do mean that. We want your feedback. In section 2, eligibility, formation, and training, the document proposes several eligibility criteria for Orthodox women who would be candidates for diaconal ordination, which include, and I'm just sort of giving an overview here, a minimum age of 40 as stated in the Holy Canons, sound theological education, which would typically entail at least a bachelor's degree and additional diaconal training, or ideally a Master of Divinity. Both monastic and lay women would be eligible. Lay women could be married, single, or widowed, but would not be eligible for marriage after ordination, as is generally true for male clergy. The section also includes the following 2 very important statements. First, as is the case with male deacons, the decision to ordain or not ordain lies with the local hierarch. Just as important as formal educational credentials are the candidate's spiritual qualities, maturity, and pastoral capacity. Thus, it's crucial that the local bishop has full confidence in her fitness for ordination. That's the first one. And the second one, quote, unlike male deacons, women deacons are not potentially eligible for ordination to the priesthood. The first statement underscores our Orthodox teaching that the charismata, or the charism to ordain, is entrusted to bishops alone, and that the ordaining bishop must personally be confident in a candidate's spiritual maturity and fitness before proceeding. And of course, this is also true with male candidates for ordination. The second statement, women deacons are not potentially eligible for ordination to the priesthood, also deserves our special attention. The St. Phoebe Center is seeking the revival of the female diaconate, which has been part of our historical Holy Orthodox tradition. We are not advocating for female priests or bishops, which is a substantially different proposal. In Section 3, Screening and Recommendation, the guidelines suggest that the screening and recommendation process for female deacons follows the current practice for male deacons. So there would be psychological and medical evaluations, there would be letters of recommendation that would be required, and if the candidate is married, the permission of the candidate's spouse would be necessary. Sections 4 and 5 of the proposed guidelines describe some of the possible ministries or pastoral roles in which deaconesses might serve and what liturgical duties they might fulfill. With respect to Section 4, ministry roles, the document says, the Orthodox Church today is in need of church-sanctioned woman-to-woman ministry, as well as the ministry of women to the entire church and the church's outreach beyond its members. I think we've heard a lot about this already this morning. And then the document goes on, I didn't put this in the slide, but goes on to list several possible ministry roles for deaconesses, which include, but are not limited to, pastoral counseling, chaplaincy, spiritual companioning, teaching religious subjects, catechesis, missionary outreach, interfaith witness, philanthropy, nursing and social work, parish administration, family ministry, and youth and young adult ministry. The ministry which each deaconess offers within her particular parish or setting will be clearly established as part of her discernment and placement process with her hierarch, and will be clearly articulated within her community. It may be an extension of her natural gifts and her theological education. It may also relate to her professional training outside the church. For example, perhaps she is a board-certified chaplain and will serve the church community from this capacity, or is a registered nurse and can serve the faithful as a parish nurse, end quote. With respect to possible liturgical responsibilities, the guidelines first states that with major orders ordination or hierotonia, a deaconess would meet the traditional criteria for fulfilling a variety of liturgical roles. These would include all of the liturgical functions in which male deacons serve. The document then lists several such liturgical functions as possible responsibilities for deaconesses, from offering petitions and censing during divine services, to preaching, to offering communion during the divine liturgy, and bringing the Eucharist to the infirm. Speaking a bit more personally from my own experience as a deacon for the past 7 years, I see the wisdom in diaconal ministry, including both pastoral and liturgical activities. The deacon out in the world, meeting with and standing alongside the faithful as they struggle with illness or economic hardship or spiritual doubts or other personal challenges, can then circle back to the liturgy. This image of the circle is one that Father John Chrysavis develops in some of his writings. But then the deacon can circle back into the liturgy and offer names at the proskomidhi, offer petitions during the liturgy for the sick, the suffering, the captives, and then offer Holy Communion to those very same Christians for the remission of sins and life everlasting. After which, the deacon circles back into the world to minister and practice pastoral care. So I think both of those roles they should not be separated. The next section of the proposed guidelines, accountability and evaluation, is especially important because it highlights the importance of church order and the local hierarch's role as episkopos, overseeing all who are engaged in ecclesiastical ministry. A deaconess would be expected to follow the same canonical guidelines that apply to male deacons and to follow all the protocols related to receiving permission to serve and travel within and outside her home metropolis. In addition, the document states, regular constructive evaluations should be conducted with participation of the deaconess, her parish priest or spiritual father or mother, or abbess, hierondissa if a monastic, and her local hierarch. This will give both the deaconess and those responsible for overseeing her diaconia the opportunity to reflect on her life and ministry within the church, identifying ways to strengthen the body of Christ. So again, that need to reflect and assess and evaluate and give guidance and make adjustments if necessary. And this brings us to the final two substantive sections of the proposed guidelines, which address the challenges of implementing the ministry of deaconess given the reality of the centuries of disuse. So how will the faithful in our parishes and the existing clergy respond? And how will they receive a deaconess among them? The document acknowledges the shock that will likely be felt by those who were unaware of the presence of deaconesses in our historical tradition. We cannot dismiss this, since this is the very purpose of reviving the ministry of deaconesses, is to promote salvation and Orthodox witness, not to confuse or drive away existing members of the church. For this reason, the guidelines emphasize the importance of the means or manner, the tropos, through which we reintroduce female diaconal ministry. Recall once more St. Gregory's words, goodness is not goodness if the means of achieving it are wrong. We must be discerning and sensitive. It is crucial that we educate the faithful and clergy broadly about the historical and present-day ministry of female deacons and about the reasons for and value of the order's revival. Such education and communication needs to be substantial and it needs to be ongoing. In addition, a deaconess should not be imposed upon a parish or monastery, should not be required within a metropolis that does not seek her gifts and ministry. Her ministry should be an organic outgrowth of a local community. She should be well known to her community members, her priest, and her bishop. And her ordination should be something that makes sense, right? Given her previous participation in the life of the church, just as should be the case for a male deacon. For these reasons, and with the hope of moving forward with care and wisdom, the guidelines document proposes the establishment of a deaconess revival commission and the use of a pilot program. So Section 8 provides details of what such a commission, there we go. Section 8 provides details of what such a commission and pilot program might look like. Rather than going through all of what's written here, I'm going to just highlight a few elements from the pilot program and the Deaconess Revival Commission. So this commission would likely be appointed by a hierarchical synod of a local church and would include clergy and laity, men and women, who would oversee and manage the pilot program for a small initial cohort of deaconesses, approximately 5 to 8 women. The commission would identify potential candidates, help to educate and prepare the parishes or monasteries where the candidates would potentially be ministering, make recommendations of candidates to the local hierarch, encourage communication and community among the candidates, and help to evaluate the program and the deaconesses' ministries over a 3-year period after ordination, updating the synod that appointed them along the way. After this pilot program concludes, then a determination will be made about future ordinations. So, friends, I am well aware of the fact that many people are drawn to orthodoxy and remain Orthodox because of our ancient character. because we are the apostolic church, and because we do not change based on social trends or the popularity of our teachings. However, deaconesses are a part of our ancient character, dating back to apostolic times. It is disingenuous for us to hide, deny, or de-emphasize this element of our historical tradition, an element that was never suspended or removed for theological or spiritual reasons. Put differently, those searching for and committed to the true and ancient church, the apostolic church, are searching for and committed to a church that ordained deaconesses. I'd like to conclude by reiterating a point that has been made by several of our symposium presenters already, one that responds to the why question. Why should we change our practice now, nearly 1,000 years after the order of deaconess fell into disuse? And to my mind, there's just one overarching, compelling reason. Because doing so promises to help the church fulfill her mission, to bear witness to the true God, to invite all people to participate in the saving life of the church, and to better offer God's love and mercy to all who are in need. In the words of the proposed guidelines document itself, the aim of all efforts of deaconesses would be to contribute positively to the salvation and spiritual care of the church's members and the larger society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deacon Perry and Dr. Frederick Frost. We will now have our panelists speak for 10 minutes each, and then we will open it up to questions. Dr. Skedros,
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay,
Uh,
I'm ready.
if
I'm fine.
if
Should
you're
I come up here or sit here?
you can sit there. You
Sit
have
here,
the
we're sitting
microphone.
here. You should go first. That's fine. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me just get my papers in order. So, and thank you, Father Perry, for that great overview as well. And thank you to the St. Phoebe Center for asking me to be a part of this panel. My comments are going to be pretty general, and they come from a particular context. I'm a historian, and I always think in terms of context. So let me give you my context so you'll understand where my comments are coming from. I think three particular items are important as I look at this document to help me and you hear what I have to say and help me think about what it is that I could offer based on in my response to this document. Number one, I grew up I'm a cradle Orthodox in a Greek Orthodox parish. I don't think I ever saw a deacon until I probably came to seminary. Number two, I'm trained as an early church and Byzantine historian. And then number three, for 15 years, I ran the program here at Holy Cross for the program for the diaconate. I don't know why I ran the program for the diaconate, but I did, and it gave me some really incredible insight. And so it's from these three perspectives that I'd like to share my thoughts with you. I'm going to start off with a reference to the Barberini Codex, which Father Philip spoke about this morning. And this codex, as you recall, is an 8th century codex, and it contains probably in one-stop shopping the earliest document that we have that lists the various liturgical ceremonies or liturgical acts and services in the church. And there are, as you've heard, there are two services, one for the ordination of male deacons and one for the ordination of female deacons. And they're pretty much identical. But I'd like to focus on one phrase, and then I'll respond to this phrase with my comments about the document. And there are two prayers that the bishop reads over the woman that's being ordained. And in the first prayer, the bishop is reciting a few things, and then the bishop says to God, the prayer is addressed to God, says, "Look down, Lord, upon this your servant." And then the phrase, "to call her to the work of your diaconate." To call her to the work of your diaconate. Parakalese aftin iston ergon tis diakonia su. I'd like to look at these three concepts: call, work, and diaconate or ministry. The Greek word is diakonia. We can debate about how to translate that. First, the call. And my response here to this call, or my understanding of this call, is different than the call that we just heard from Carrie. The call that we've been talking about here is the church bubbling up for a call to restore the diaconate. That's what my understanding of St. Phoebe Center is, that the members of the church bubbling up to call for the rejuvenation of the diaconate, the female diaconate. This is a different call. In 2005, Holy Cross got a call from the Eparchial Synod, the Holy Eparchial Synod of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of North America. And that call was to create a diaconate program. We were called. We got the phone call. And so we sat down as a faculty to create the program. I got a call to run the program, so I ran the program. But in 2007, we opened it up with 3 people. And by this September, we've ordained, the church has ordained 61 deacons from the program, not bishops, deacons. And we've had about 90, 95 students that have completed the program. We have about 30 that are in the program now. And I share those numbers because they reflect lots of things that I'll try to say a few things about. They reflect a real foundational grassroots desire to serve. But what's the difference is that we may not have known about that desire. St. Phoebe's knows about that desire. Your center knows about the desire. But the church called us up. And I keep hearing today that we're still waiting for the call. And Carrie and the center here has suggested one way to do that call is to provide the bishops with a roadmap. Another way is for a bishop to call somebody up and say it's time to be ordained. My point, though, is that as this prayer says, the prayer to God is, look down upon your servant to call her to the work. Now, most importantly, though, there's a response because there's a woman on her knees at the altar table to receive the ordination. So it's sort of the Orthodox response and call, if you will, from the Protestant world. It's the Orthodox response and call to ministry. Or call and response, I said it the wrong way, call and response. That is, the church calls, but you and I have to respond. You and I have to respond. Somebody has to kneel at that altar table for that call. But my point is that I don't think we would have a diaconate program for men diaconate here at Holy Cross had not the episcopacy of our archdiocese said we need a diaconate program. And that's our challenge, I think. That's our challenge, is try to shake people enough at the top to see that there is a need to make that phone call, to get things moving. Second is the work. And we have asked for 15, 16 years for the Greek Archdiocese to send us, what is it that you really want us to teach the deacons? What should the program look like? And there is no position paper. There's no white paper on the diaconal ministry, at least that I'm aware of. People have written about it. Kyriaki Fitzgerald has written about the female diaconate, and from her book we tease things out. Father Jean Chrysovis, in his book on the diaconate, has provided a remarkable foundation for what the ministry of the diaconate is about. I've never seen an official document from the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese or any other church, but I haven't looked that much, so I shouldn't say, about this is what a deacon does. I wish we had this document 15 years ago. Because what the document does, actually, it really talks about what is the work, what is this ergon that the female diaconate, female member of the church is kneeling down in front of the altar and is being ordained to what is that work. And I think the document, as Father Perry has pointed out here, and you'll read on your own, has really identified all the things that are possible. Well, not all, but many things that are possible. But when we were asked to do the diaconate program here at the seminary, there was really one ergon, one work: reduce communion lines. That was the work. Well, this is where the grassroots kicks in. Because the good thing about not having anybody from the top tell you what to do is that at the bottom you figure it out what you think should be done. So we started doing classes on pastoral care. We started doing classes on preaching. In fact, we had a bishop tell us no more classes on preaching. Deacons don't preach. But our president, Father Nathanael, said, no, we're going to teach these deacons how to preach. And so we had a class, and we have a class on preaching. So in other words, we didn't have anything coming down from the top, so things bubbled up from the bottom, and we created a diaconate program. And if you were to survey, which we do survey our deacons now that have been ordained in the Archdiocese, they're doing a lot of what is in this document because there's so much work to be done. Which leads me to my third point here, and that is my point about ministry, about diaconia, as mentioned in the prayer. It's fascinating to me that the text says your ministry, your diaconate, not her diaconate, because remember the prayer is addressed to God. Ask any of the 60 plus deacons that have been ordained out of our deacon program, what is the one thing that we would hammer on them? And I'm not a deacon. I'm not even tonsured. So I don't have anything, right? So I'm like the lowest of the low when it comes to the laity. But the one thing we kept on saying was I really thought when we opened the deacon program that nobody would get ordained. I would say the Archdiocese isn't going to do this, because I had priests calling me up and say, why are you doing this program? We don't need deacons. We don't need deacons. So we would tell the students, if you want to get ordained and if you think there should be deacons in the Archdiocese, then just shut your mouth. If anybody asks you anything in the parish, ask the priest. I don't know. If the priest says jump, you say how high. The point was that don't make it about your ministry. Make it about the parish's ministry. Make it about the Metropolitan's ministry, because it's not your ministry. It's God's ministry. And I think the issue about power that has come up a couple of times here, people that oppose ordination of women to the diaconate, and we've heard this today, often say, well, it's just a power grab. Yeah, it's a power grab if that's how you think of ministry. Then that must say something that what you think about ministry, right? But that's not what the prayer says. The prayer isn't her ministry, it's God's ministry. It's a ministry given to her through ordination. And the same prayer is for the male deacon as well. Two final pragmatic observations, which I know, and I hesitate to say anything specifically about the document because the people who put the document together have thought a lot more about it than I have, so I don't really feel qualified to do so. But there are two kind of hidden gems in the document that do come out, and Deacon Perry mentioned one of them. The one that Deacon Perry mentioned is about ordination to the priesthood. Now, we heard Telly say earlier that, theologically there might not be any sort of distinction from diaconate to priesthood to bishop for women. And I think he's right about that, but that's not what's being said here. That's not what's being said here. So when our program started for the male diaconate, it was called permanent diaconate. It's called permanent diaconate because the fear was, as President Cantona said earlier in the morning, that people would use this as a stepping stone. Men would use it as a stepping stone. Unfortunately, we don't have a permanent diaconate, which is a theological question now as well for women. But in theory, we don't have a permanent diaconate. But the fact that St. Phoebe's is saying here it's only about the diaconate, I think, is a huge plus. And it should stay that way. It's only about the diaconate. Second thing is the reason why the male diaconate in the Archdiocese has worked is because it's an economic issue. Why? Not because it's replacing a priest. They really haven't replaced priests. That's the important point. They haven't replaced priests, but they're not getting paid. These are mid-career and retired men who have a full-time job, 9 to 5, and they're professional, and they have a spiritual story and a spiritual commitment that is remarkable. And I think that's what is there and just waiting for the church to tap in a female diaconate. So you do mention in the document about possible remuneration. I'm not saying take it out, but I do think one of the selling points, not to be too economic about this, is that it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't have to cost anything, because most deacons anyway are going to have a full-time job, because the parish isn't going to support a deacon. Thank you for letting me offer my thoughts, and all the best.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. Can you lower my mic then? Yesterday I said I was scared and nervous, and I am still a bit uncomfortable. And so the people who were mentioned, the women or others who were kind of feeling uncomfortable, just know that there are hierarchs in the room that feel uncomfortable as well. I have, before I begin my comments, I want to just say that as a hierarch for 5 years now, going on 6 years, there have been times when I've had to make some difficult decisions and do things that are not popular, and to serve, not to please. And that's how I feel God has called me. He has called me to serve, not to please. I have had the blessing of several very, 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 very strong women around me during my archpastoral ministry. Several strong men as well, clergy and so forth. But it's the women that have kind of encouraged me when having to make these difficult decisions. And I want to just mention 17 very strong women who I am extremely grateful for. And I kind of tried to list them in the order of meeting them and working with them. And so please allow me to just do that, because I think they deserve, the reason I'm here is really because of their encouragement. Georgia DeMeros, Helen Alexander, Vicky Carl, Joan Berg, Gail Holguin, Cindy Atavis, Rachel Pontikis, Lori Champus, Anne-Marie Adams, Pam Argyris, Vicky Connor, Diaconessa Alexandria Kalina, Juliana Arsenitis, Effie Panos, Mary Scott, C.J. Pravosnik, and Robin Bornstein. And I mean, there were some nights early on where I was up till midnight, 1 a.m., and they were ministering to me. I mean, they were offering me guidance and support in many ways, like the myrrh-bearing women were offering to Christ. Not that I'm Christ in any way, but that's the service that these women had offered to me and have helped me gain courage. So I'm going to speak as much as I can with courage, with kindness, and with candor. And there are going to be some things that don't make sense because they don't make sense for me still. I'm still trying to kind of wrap my mind around this topic. This is my first time in your presence, in the presence of the St. Phoebe Center, my first time kind of addressing this formally. And so I will agree and disagree with some of the things that I've heard, and I'll try my best to say why. And I'm open to learning and being corrected. So I have two sections of my talk or my response. One is specifically to the points of the guidelines, and then some general comments. So for sections 2 and 3, section 1 is just your intro, which is great. You know, your why. I'm not going to say anything about that. You've worked hard on that. 2 and 3, eligibility, formation, training, screening, and recommendation. Just some comments, and it's already been said. These kind of the eligibility, the guidelines, the requirements kind of follow the male diaconate requirements. But I would say this is an opportunity for this process to help us enhance the overall requirements and the eligibility, the training, the screening, and so forth of the diaconate. Okay, so as you're working on this, I think there's a lot of value in the overall diaconate requirements and eligibility. Now, I will say, I'll ask you to consider two things in this section. The first is perhaps a footnote or something about this 40-year minimum as stated in the canons. And I know that we've talked about it extensively, and Valerie did a great job to kind of tell us kind of where it stems from, perhaps. But I do think that guidelines that mention it without any footnote, kind of somebody would look at it and say, well, oh, then we can only be 40 and over. And we can't just say, well, men have been ordained younger than 25 or under 30. But there's a kind of, let's understand the reason. We shouldn't hide from that reason, even if it's an ugly reason and an outdated reason. Kind of saying at the end or something, pointing people to, what's not really functional and maybe more dysfunctional is important. Second thing to consider is saying something a little bit more about the spouse, the husband of the deaconesses. And there are canons that speak about the wife of a deacon, and I think we should be open about that, and we should speak about, the man should be Orthodox, right? Cannot be a non-Orthodox Christian. Has to be never married before, right? Has to be a virgin, right? We should say that. I mean, these are impediments essentially for ordination if the man is married to a woman that doesn't meet some of these requirements for their own ordination. There's a kind of, they go in this together. So I think that if there are going to be rules that dictate the impediments associated with men who are going into the diaconate and their spouse, I mean, if we're modeling the male requirements, there should be kind of the same thing for the female diaconate. I don't necessarily think that all those things are okay, but I'm not going to get into that. I'll get into that if you ask me questions. Section 4, possible ministries. I think the women-to-women ministry that I've been hearing about should not be underestimated. There's a lot here that I think needs to be unpacked. It needs to be highlighted more in some way, if nothing else, in these guidelines. I think that I heard a lot today that I've learned from. I would ask you to consider an addendum. Add something at the end that speaks about this important feature: women ministering to women. Let women and men understand this more. I think you can point to men-to-men ministries that are impactful as an example of why women-to-women ministry is important. We have men's groups. No one says anything about that, right? It's a man who's leading the men's group, or a man who's leading the women's group. I would say I don't think your guidelines do enough to showcase what women do today in the church. You have a statement in there and says, the Orthodox Church Today is in need of church-sanctioned woman-to-woman ministry and woman to the entire church ministries. I think what you mean to say is ordained woman to woman, not church-sanctioned. Ministry is always in the church is church-sanctioned. So there are programs, there are works of women in the church already. So the way it's worded, it sounds as if there's nothing going on and nothing is sanctioned by the church. But I think your point is, there is a ministry sanctioned to be led by ordained women. Yeah, because if you don't explicitly state what women do, not what they could do, but what they do, it's like it furthers the power grab argument. Right? There's nothing to grab because women are already doing it. You're talking about how do you empower them with the Holy Spirit to do even more of it. So again, if you want to eliminate the power grab, the women are here to take over, to become bishops. Well, point to what women are doing. Showcase that. And there's a lot of really good work. And it's not just chanting and reading. I mean, there's a lot of. I can speak to some of that later if you'd like. accountability and evaluation. This doesn't exist in the church. I mean, like, seriously? There is no system of accountability and evaluation.
Preach it, Your Eminence.
Yes,
Preach it.
this does not exist. This does not exist. Formally, it does not exist, right? There is the spiritual counseling and that kind of accountability to someone that you sit in front of and speak to and share. But in terms of an official process of accountability and mentoring and guiding and shaping, that does not exist for men, does not exist for bishops, it does not exist for priests, it does not exist for deacons who are men. And it certainly, if we can create something for the women, maybe we can model it up. But I just want to say that this is aspirational. It's not, right now, reality. One of my recommendations, again, in the U.S. context, and I can only speak from my own experiences as a Metropolitan, my deacons are not assigned to churches. My deacons are not assigned to a parish. My deacons are attached to me, or assigned to me, and I attach them and I deploy them as needed. They're part of my ministry. And it works because it keeps priests from thinking that they own them or they control them. And Father Perry is in my metropolis. He's attached to Holy Apostles, but there are times when I say, hey, deacon, I need your help here, or can you go do this? Now, granted, most of my deacons are liturgical in function, but if there's ever something that I need that's, can you go visit this person, can you go do that? They know that if I call them, their priest does not trump them. Their priest can give them work if there is pastoral work that's to be done, but essentially it's a higher calling for them. They're called to be part of my ministry as well. So I think it works quite well because the deacons know that they're accountable to me and not to the parish council, not to this, not to that. They work with the parishes. They don't get paid by the parish. So they're kind of free to move around as we need in the metropolis. Presence in the parish. I think there's an inaccurate statement in here. It says, many of the faith, that's point 7. Many of the faithful are aware of the historical order of the deaconesses and actively support it. I actually disagree with that. I don't think that many people know what that is. And of the people who know it, yeah, they probably do support it. So if we're looking at our bubble or speaking in an echo chamber, yes, everyone here supports it, right? But I bet you if you look at the campus of Hellenic College Holy Cross, they either don't know about it or don't support it. And most parishes and most people don't know about it, and their knee-jerk reaction, if we were to just say, hey, would you support deaconesses? They'd say no. Why? Because it's something new to them. It's change. It's, I don't know. It's like feminist. There's a lot of reason why people would say no immediately. There's a lot of reasons why people would say yes. But I think that statement is just a little bit too, it's too broad. I think you maybe bringing it down to kind of reality where the vast majority of people don't even know what we believe, let alone, the deaconess and the function of the deaconess and the need. I think our people are very, very illiterate when it comes to our faith, and Elizabeth can speak to that. I just think also it is key to say something about the need to be visible in the church and more visible in the church. And what do I mean by that? Not just like at the altar, at the Bangari, or even in terms of liturgical presence, but like taking on visible leadership roles. That has to be encouraged. That has to be, it would be great to be able to get to the point where women are holding executive positions, not only at a parish, but at diocesan, metropolis, archdiocesan levels and so forth. So I think that has to happen. That will only help the process of introducing the deaconess. The pilot program, I think, in this point here, if we're looking at America, I'll just say, you mentioned that it probably requires a synod and so forth. If I had to guess, it'd probably be easier for a jurisdiction that does not have a synod to do something before a jurisdiction that has a synod. It's just one less layer of approval. It doesn't mean that bishop doesn't go to their synod maybe overseas, But I do think that, a bishop who's here and realizes, hey, I need help right away and it's urgent, may actually go overseas to their synod and say, I need this, versus a local synod here that has to review it and looks at different things and so forth. So general comments. I'm gonna go down this so that I don't kind of take up too much time. I think in general, this document does a great job of talking about how. There's a process, a guideline, the when, you're saying now we need it, great. The why, the where even, but you don't do a really good job of saying who. Who's gonna help do this? Who beyond the St. Phoebe Center is gonna do this? Who are your champions? Who are the ambassadors? I mean, I look around and I see a lot of women. It's great. I see very few men. I just want to say, I commend, Dr. Kiru, Dr. Limbarakis for coming and supporting their daughters. I think that you need more of that. We need more of that. We need more buy-in from who's. The who's are going to help reach your vision, not the how. The how doesn't matter. It's a great book. Read it by Dan Sullivan, Who Not How. I give it to all my priests. It's who. We need more who's who want this and who will help you get there. I will also say this. I think there's something about delusion and radical. I think part of this text is delusional and part of the vision is radical. And I like radical, but I don't think delusional helps. Delusion does not help. I don't think this can happen now. I think that's delusional. I don't think that we're gonna pilot a program and in 3 years we're gonna know a lot about the diaconate program for women or the deaconesses. That's delusional. I think though it's important to embrace radical. That's what the church is. Christ is radical. And I'm gonna give you some examples of what I mean by that. What's the difference between delusional kind of steps or presentations versus radical and aspirational. So I think before we can get to a deaconess program, an ordained deaconess in America, maybe it happens in Africa, maybe it happens in Asia, maybe it happens elsewhere. But if we want to see that happen in America, I see some 10x things that need to happen, 10x jumps, growth, changes that need to happen. So the seminary landscape needs to change. There are like 2 or 3 seminarians in this room. And 2 of my seminarians are here because I told them to come because I want them to hear. But I don't see other seminarians here. I don't even see a lot of the women students here on campus. So seminary landscape needs to change. They need to do a better job of recruiting and weeding out students, in my opinion, who are misogynists, students. Amen. Oh, yeah. I remember a student that fought another woman here when I was a student because she wanted to fight to sing, to chant, and the student said, no, you can't chant, you can't do this, and she slapped him. Yeah. But this is real. I'm just saying, this is real. So we need to change what's going on at seminaries, our faculty, selective faculty, selective students, the staff. The culture needs to kind of change because these students are going out there and they're going to be priests, they're going to be lay leaders, they're going to be out in the field. And if what they're seeing here is the norm, then what they go out in their parishes is going to have to reflect this. And so I was going to ask Father Zamaris, do the women help serve in the altar here?
In my class, they do.
No, not in your class. In the altar of our seminary. Do they clean the altar of our seminary? I remember when I had altar duty, the women would not clean the altar. They would just stay outside the altar. Why? I mean, if this is what we want in our parishes, it's got to start somewhere where people are trained. So I just say but that's a 10x jump. If we can change that, that's a huge jump from where we are today. Next, the parish landscape. I think we have to, we've got to have, again, I said, women assuming and being invited to lead on a higher level than, what they're currently doing. I said change the administrative landscape. have women take on roles, much higher roles, visible roles, and in administration. And then, finally, ordain women. I think that can happen. I don't think you need 20 years or 30 years, but I do think that the reason why we didn't have anything happen after Rhodes is because the landscape wasn't changing. There was a call, but no one was changing the landscape to be able to have those seeds germinate, right? Those seeds were planted, but nothing was changing. And then I would say, people can walk with their feet and their purse. So if indeed people were kind of threatened that they were going to keep their money, they weren't, Church of Alexandria, if that's accurate, I don't know if it is, but I'm assuming it is or whatever. Other people can do the same and walk with their feet and with their purse. When we're not taking steps to do this. Another thing is, we mentioned, this document mentions church. What's that?
I'm sorry, but do we want those people in the church that withhold money? If that's the reason why they're in the church, to have the power because they say, I've got the money, therefore I must have a say in what's going on in the church? Yesterday we learned about pleasing God, not pleasing others.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, but we don't need those people in the church.
Well,
if they walk away,
yeah.
good luck to them.
I'm happy to take your question and your comment after.
Sorry, but it was
That's okay. I love it. I love it. That's okay. There's a question about what is church in the document, and at various times here, the word church was used, and at times I feel like you're referring to the body of Christ, and other times you're referring to the bishops. So if you're referring to bishops, speak about it clearly. Don't say the church is calling. It's like, well, who's calling? It's the bishop, like Dr. Skedros said. It was Archbishop Demetrius who called and said, I need this. And then I would just say, go easy on us as much as you can. Elizabeth's gonna kill me. Because I will say, I think change is happening. On our level, the hierarchical level, I can speak to that. I can say that many of the bishops are moved right now or crippled by fear, mostly of the unknown. I think if I had to say what this feels like to me, is like a father being abandoned by his kids. And that's scary. Like making a decision that causes everyone to abandon you. And I think, we say it's easy, like, oh, well, are we afraid of losing people? We're losing people already. Well, bishops are scared of losing people. Because this is our flock, right? It's not that easy to say, oh, it's okay, you're losing people now. Who cares if you lose people who don't agree with the female deacons? You'll get other people to come in. It's like, no, that cripples us with fear. And we've got to overcome that, I think, and we have to be motivated by love. So with that, I will turn it over to my sister, Elizabeth Prodromou, who will definitely add more substance than what I have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. First of all, let me start by thanking everyone here, St. Phoebe's for convening us all, Oxia and the many other organizations that have supported the work of St. Phoebe's. Thank you to the Meliodas Cultural Center, and thank you to all of us for being here today. I also want to do a shout out to someone we're going to celebrate this evening, my beloved friend Marilyn Ravelis. So it's wonderful for her to be here. She's been a champion of St. Phoebe's and women in the church since I can ever remember. And I want to organize my remarks in 3 parts because I'm mindful of time, but I'll follow the guidance of my Metropolitan and maybe go over a little bit. But anyway, first I want to tell you a little bit about how I read this document. Secondly, I'd like to make 4 very brief general comments. Then I'd like to turn to a few specifics. In terms of how I come to this document, as an Orthodox Christian, as a wife, as a mother, as a social scientist, as somebody who's worked in diplomacy in the practitioner space. I've been reading with care. I read the document with care. I've also read with care the text of St. Catherine's Vision. I've been following very closely the work of the Roman Catholic Church, what they've done in terms of their study commissions on the female diaconate, 2016, 2020, and their recent discussions in their own synod. I've been following their appointment of women under Pope Francis to the dicastery. So reading this document in all of these contexts. I should also say that I take at face value the sincerity of the pronouncements of our hierarchs, and in particular, last night's message from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and Archbishop Elpidoforos, and all the other hierarchs and decision makers, and I'll call them that because at the end of the day, they're the primary decision makers who have issued these multiple continuous calls for the restoration of the deaconess. So I take that at face value. And I come to this conversation with a love for Christ and a love for our church. And because of that love, I do think that we have to really speak openly, honestly, and from our heart about, as all of the speakers have done, about some challenges, but also about the real possibilities. And I also come to this from just having taught my class on Wednesday afternoon, my seminar on Eastern Christianity and global context at Boston College, and I shared a quote from the late, great Yaroslav Pelikan, who started his life as a Lutheran, taught for all of his life at Yale University, and at the age of 75 embraced Orthodoxy and said he was coming home to who he always was. And Pelikan's quote is one many of you may have heard, but I think it's instructive for framing how we're looking at this document and everything we've been doing here these days. And the quote goes as follows: "Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living." And so he says, tradition lives in conversation with the past, while remembering where we are now, when we are, and that it is we who have to decide. So I think the Pelikan comment is really instructive. Now, having said that, let me make just a few general comments and then turn to the specifics. General comments from this document within the context of the presentations last night and today. First of all, I think it's very important, and President Cantonis and Professor Skedros, really opened this up for us. I think it's important that when we consider the female deaconess, that we learn from the existing male diaconate program. Still relatively new, but really not that new. I think 16 years old now. So that's 16 long years. I think we should learn from what's been working with that and what hasn't worked so well. And in particular, I think we need to be very honest about the fact that it appears there's really no full-blown consensus, robust consensus on the commitment to the need for and the sustainability of the male diaconate program. And I think anecdotally, and certainly from Dr. Skedros's leadership of that program, anecdotal reports suggest that there's a real ambivalence on the part of priests about the current program, about its design, its eligibility, and its impact. And there seems to be a relative lack of clarity and specificity when it comes to what the episcopacy hoped for from that program. So I think we need to look at what the male diaconate program tells us and therefore avoid some of the pitfalls when it comes to a female diaconate program. That's the first general point. The second general point is that I think it's important, of course, that we do not reduce the life of women in the church to the office of the deaconess. And I think that while we're moving ahead on the deaconess project, that we need to continue what I think is sorely needed, which is quite radical improvements in the religious literacy of us as church. And we can talk about that, and I think we're going to do some of that in the breakout groups. And those are things that can be very practically addressed. So we need to have an approach that is one that emphasizes synchroneity, simultaneity. So constant education on what it means to be church. And as Sophia, my beloved daughter, said this morning, also recognize that right now our religious education in the church tends to extract women or overlook women or not treat women in terms of the fullness of women's service in the church historically and in the present. So don't reduce everything to the deaconess, but focus on that, and at the same time improve our religious education and take action on those things where we can take action. And that's where priests have agency, and their metropolitans should support their agency. And that's with female altar servers, readers, chanters. Visibility matters. Getting people used to seeing women in all of these spaces can happen as we're moving forward on knowing our faith better and living it better, and then establishing the deaconess, reestablishing the deaconess. Third general comment, pay attention to language. Language matters. And I particularly like that we have proposed a commission for the revival of the deaconess. You know, innovation is a dirty word in the Orthodox Church. So I like the fact that, you know, we're talking here about revival, restoration. We're not talking about rupture or some sort of dangerous innovation. So language matters, and I think that's a issue that's a very positive thing when it comes to language. Something that I would like to make mention of that hasn't come up here, but in someone that you referenced, Your Eminence, you referred to her as Deaconessa. I've been noticing the use of that term more frequently to refer to, I suppose, deacons' wives. I would urge that we not use that term. They're not Deaconesses. I mean, physicians' wives aren't doctresses. Veterinarians' wives aren't veterinarianesses. Pilots' wives aren't pilotesses. And I think that is confusing people when they see that term. And so I think the language matter is something that's very important as we continue to prepare to do the things that we want to do. And then the next general point, in all respects, I think it's absolutely urgent, whether we're talking about eligibility, scope of service, and here I'll use, you know, more sort of secular terms, job description, evaluation, and thank you about performance review, and even issues of compensation. I think people should be paid for their work, whether they're men or women. So on all of those issues, I think it's very important that men and women are treated equally, and particularly in an archdiocesan, metropolitan, and parish setting, and this cuts across jurisdictional lines, where we've seen the melding of service with professionalization. I think the same expectations, requirements, and evaluation standards that we would apply in professional spaces outside of the church should be applied for the deaconess, deacons, clergy, and our hierarchy as well. Okay, these are my general points. I'm very mindful of time, so I'm sorry, I'm sort of racing through this. Okay, let me turn now to the specifics. And regarding specifics, I would like to focus on timeline, composition, and content. Now, when it comes to timeline, let me go to my notes here. When it comes to timeline, I'm a little discouraged, I confess, by, you know, hearing with regularity, even amongst us who are all supporting this, that the deaconess can't happen now, that we're not ready, that, you know, we don't want to scandalize people. And I guess I would ask all of us, is the scandal, which is our current condition of error, somehow less offensive, less damaging, less traumatizing, less, you know, scandalous in the prayers, which I absolutely love on Holy Monday. They like shock us. I love shock, okay? Is the scandal of our condition of error somehow less bad than how we imagine people may be scandalized with the reestablishment of the deaconess? Unless we have hard data on that, which we certainly do not, I think we're operating in some sort of abstract space. And we are, you know, perhaps taking anecdotal cases or even projecting our own fears, concerns, trepidations for, you know, a good outcome onto the timeline. So I would urge that we adopt a more active timeline rather than an eschatological timeline. That's my first point about the program, okay, and the proposal, the pilot program. The second thing is, and regarding timeline and how we don't even keep to our own timelines. I was, very fortunate and humbled to be on the delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate at the Holy and Great Council in Crete. And, as Father John knows, probably better than most of us here, because he's done so much of the work on, consistent work on the preparation for Crete in 2016. It took from 1902, when the then Ecumenical Patriarch Joachim called for a Holy and Great Council, until 2016 for us to have a council, okay? And then in 2016 at Crete, there was an agreement at Crete that a new council would be called in 5 years. So we're now at 2023, and I was always bad at math. I understand our hierarchy is collectively bad at math, okay? So I think, we're not good at meeting our own timelines, and I think that's because we don't hold ourselves accountable, and we underestimate what we can do. We always underestimate ourselves, and I think we need to push ourselves on the timeline. That's the first thing, timeline. On composition, I'll say a few things. And here, whether this is a pilot program for one, metropolis or something else, I would say on composition. I would urge that in terms of the Deaconess Revival Commission's composition, it's absolutely crucial to adopt a whole of church approach. And by that, I mean that we should ensure that there is intergenerational representation on the commission. I think that because understanding the needs as well as identifying the capacity for the deaconess, we'll have a fuller understanding with cross-generational input. I think it would be important to try to draw women from extant ministries in the church, things like Philoptochos, things like Department of Religious Education, things like Crossroad, things like OVM, and a shout out to Carolyn Barakis for, transforming something in her heart and her mind into OVC, Orthodox Vocational Volunteer Corps, sorry, senior moment here. That we bring from existing ministries women who are active and include those in terms of input. And then finally, also in terms of composition, I do think it's really important that when we talk about both the commission but also the deaconess itself, that when we're talking about, at least at the academic training level, it's very important that, yes, theology and religious studies are core sections, but I think it's really important to be cross-disciplinary, and by that I mean social scientists like me, historians like people who do history, anthropologists, but also from the professions. So we're talking about medicine, psychology, security, you name it. So that's a first content point. Second content point, just going through a couple of the bullet points. One, I think that I've said that about sort of inclusivity. Two, I think something that jumped out at me was the attention to dress and attire. For me, that's always like a red flag. I've literally never heard a conversation about what attire do maybe it happens. What attire do deaconesses wear? Do they wear their raso? Do they wear their civilian clothing? And so again, I think it's absolutely important that on those things, women and men are treated equally, because there's a kind of, concerning possibility to slip towards identifying women's attire with their sinfulness, which we all know is, informed into the misogyny that we've talked about. So the attire bullet point. The next thing I would say is on each deaconess works with her local clergy in partnership to best minister to the needs of the faithful. I think this goes back to Dr. Skedros and also President Cantonis's points that, for clergy to actually trust that deacons can actually help them. Deacons will be helpers and deacons will serve. I think that's important, and I would also include in their parish councils, because at the end of the day, parish councils and priests need to work together. Parish councils have their ear to the ground in terms of some of the needs in the parish, and so the deacons should be in conversation with them, deaconesses. And then finally, here where it says examining after a 3-year period by their bishops, I wonder, is there such a feedback process that existed for the male diaconate? If not, again, we're learning here in these proposals as much about the male diaconate and who we are as church writ large as we are learning about women in the church. And for me, that's one of the most important takeaways from all of this, that this isn't just about women. This is about us as church. And we have to keep on repeating that over and over again. So these are my, content points. And then just by way of some general conclusions and action items, one of the things I wondered is whether or not it would be useful, instead of thinking of this as a pilot program at the local level, to actually request, and if we're talking GOA, and that seems to be what we were talking about here, that we could actually request from the synod that they actually establish a commission on the revival of the deaconess, and we can propose to them these ideas about composition and mission of that commission, that we establish a timeline and hold accountable. If you look at some of the things that have happened with the Roman Catholic Church, Pope Francis established the study commission on the revival of the female deaconess in 2016. He was anticipating that they would come to a decision and they would move forward. Instead, the can's been kicked down the road because he said, they had not been able to reach consensus. I think it's important to establish benchmarks, timelines for implementation, and also establish what we mean by consensus in these kinds of commissions. Consensus can be unanimity, which I suppose is the ideal type for most things in this world, but consensus can also mean the majority. And I don't know, because I'm not an expert on the ecumenical councils, but since people got excommunicated from councils, I don't think that the councils functioned on unanimity. The consensus meant the majority. So I think that's important in terms of the work of this commission. And then finally, data. Dr. Carrie Limbarakis is here. He and I have been, appointed to a new Archon committee on the role of women in the church. I would invite everyone who's interested to become part of that. One of the things that we are particularly concerned about, we haven't yet started the actual work, but is that we don't have data. We keep talking about the church's needs. We keep talking about what people will or won't accept, what they'll be scandalized by, what they'll embrace. We don't have data. We need to do robust survey research across parishes that we have serious quantitative experts who run these surveys so that we can make sense of them, because we may indeed be dramatically surprised. People may be a lot more ready than we give them credit for, and that's why I say let's not underestimate. And then finally, and this is my last comment, on the issue of shock. Well, Jesus Christ was a shock. And, he's the best shock that happened to this world. I don't think we should fear shock. I know we fear scandal, but again, I go back to what's more scandalous, living in error or trying to correct the error. But shock needn't have a negative connotation. Shock can be something that, as with all of us, has offered us the opportunity for salvation. So again, I think we shouldn't be afraid. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists.